Chapter 28 of The Virginian. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Virginian by Owen Wister. Chapter 28. No Dream to Wake From. For a long while after she had left him, he lay still, stretched in his chair. His eyes were fixed steadily upon the open window and the sunshine outside. There he watched the movement of the leaves upon the green cottonwoods. What had she said to him when she went? She had said, "Now I know how unhappy I have been." These sweet words he repeated to himself over and over, fearing in some way that he might lose them. They almost slipped from him at times, but with a jump of his mind he caught them again and held them. And then, "I'm not all strong yet," he murmured. "I must have been very sick." And, weak from his bullet wound and fever, he closed his eyes without knowing it. There were the cottonwoods again, waving, waving, and he felt the cool, pleasant air from the window. He saw the light draught stir the ashes in the great stone fireplace. "I have been asleep," he said. "But she was certainly here herself. Oh yes, surely. She always has to go away every day, because the doctor says Why, she was reading," he broke off aloud. "David Copperfield." There it was on the floor. "Aha! Nailed you anyway," he said. "But how scared I am of myself. You're a fool. Of course it's so. No fever business could make you feel like this." His eye dwelt a while on the fireplace, next on the deer horns, and next it traveled toward the shelf where her books were, but it stopped before reaching them. "Better say off the names before I look," said he. "I've had a heap o' misreading visions, and supposin' if this was just my sickness foolin' me some more, I'd want to die. I would die. Now we'll see. If Copperfield is on the floor," he looked stealthily to be sure that it was, "then she was reading to me when everything happened, and then there should be a hole in the book row top left. Top left," he repeated, and warily brought his glance to the place. "Proved!" he cried. "It's all so." He now noticed the miniature of Grandmother Stark. "You are awful like her," he whispered. "You're certainly awful like her. May I kiss you too, ma'am?" Then, tottering, he rose from his sick chair. The Navajo blanket fell from his shoulders, and gradually, experimentally, he stood upright. Helping himself with his hand slowly along the wall of the room, and round to the opposite wall with many a pause, he reached the picture and very gently touched the forehead of the ancestral dame with his lips. "I promise to make your little girl happy," he whispered. He almost fell in stooping to the portrait, but caught himself and stood carefully quiet, trembling and speaking to himself. "Where is your strength?" he demanded. "I reckon it is joy that has unsteadied your legs." The door opened. It was she, come back with his dinner. "My heavens!" she said, and setting the tray down, she rushed to him. She helped him back to his chair, and covered him again. He had suffered no hurt, but she clung to him, and presently he moved and let himself kiss her with fuller passion. "I will be good," he whispered. "You must," she said. "You look so pale." "You are speaking low, like me," he answered. "But we have no dream we can wake from." Had she surrendered on this day to her cow puncher, her wild man? Was she forever wholly his? Had the Virginian's fire so melted her heart that no rift in it remained? So she would have thought if any thought had come to her, but in his arms to day thought was lost in something more divine. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29. Word to Bennington. They kept their secret for a while, or at least they had that special joy of believing that no one in all the world but themselves knew this that had happened to them. But I think that there was one person who knew how to keep a secret even better than these two lovers. Mrs. Taylor made no remarks to any one whatever. Nobody on Bear Creek, however, was so extraordinarily cheerful and serene. That peculiar severity which she had manifested in the days when Molly was packing her possessions had now altogether changed. In these days she was endlessly kind and indulgent to her "dearie." Although as a housekeeper Mrs. Taylor believed in punctuality at meals, and visited her offspring with discipline when they were late without good and sufficient excuse, Molly was now exempt from the faintest hint of reprimand. "And it's not because you're not her mother," said George Taylor, bitterly. "She used to get it too, and we're the only ones that get it. There she comes, just as we're about ready to quit. Aren't you going to say nothing to her?" "George," said his mother, "when you've saved a man's life, it'll be time for you to talk." So Molly would come in to her meals with much irregularity, and her remarks about the imperfections of her clock met with no rejoinder. And yet one can scarcely be so severe as had been Mrs. Taylor, and become wholly as mild as milk. There was one recurrent event that could invariably awaken hostile symptoms in the dame. Whenever she saw a letter arrive with the Bennington postmark upon it, she shook her fist at that letter. "What's family pride?" she would say to herself. "Taylor could be a son of the Revolution if he'd a mind to. I wonder if she has told her folks yet." And when letters directed to Bennington would go out, Mrs. Taylor would inspect every one as if its envelope ought to grow transparent beneath her eyes, and yield up to her its great secret, if it had one. But in truth these letters had no great secret to yield up, until one day, yes, one day Mrs. Taylor would have burst, were bursting a thing that people often did. 3 letters were the cause of this emotion on Mrs. Taylor's part. One addressed to Bennington, one to Dunbarton, and the third, here was the great excitement, to Bennington, but not in the little schoolmarm's delicate writing. A man's hand had traced those plain, steady vowels and consonants. "It's come!" exclaimed Mrs. Taylor at this sight. "He has written to her mother himself." That is what the Virginian had done, and here is how it had come about. The sick man's convalescence was achieved. The weeks had brought back to him not his whole strength yet, that could come only by many miles of open air on the back of Monte, but he was strong enough now to get strength. When a patient reaches this stage, he is out of the woods. He had gone for a little walk with his nurse. They had taken, under the doctor's recommendation, several such little walks, beginning with a 5-minute one, and at last to-day accomplishing 3 miles. "No, it has not been too far," said he. "I am afraid I could walk twice as far." "Afraid?" "Yes, because it means I can go to work again. This thing we have had together is over." For reply she leaned against him. "Look at you," he said. "Only a little while ago you had to help me stand on my legs. And now " For a while there was silence between them. "I have never had a right down sickness before," he presently went on. "Not to remember, that is. If any person had told me I could enjoy such a thing " He said no more, for she reached up, and no more speech was possible. "How long has it been?" he next asked her. She told him. "Well, if it could be forever No, not forever, with no more than this. I reckon I'd be sick again. But if it could be forever, with just you and me, and no one else to bother with. But any longer would not be doing right by your mother. She would have a right to think ill of me." "Oh," said the girl, "let us keep it." "Not after I am gone. Your mother must be told." "It seems so Can't we Oh, why need anybody know?" "Your mother